dark and swirling waters of the mighty Mississippi River flow, past the historic city of Crosse, Wisconsin, holding secrets beneath the surface that few dare to whisper about in the light of day. It was here, in a modest timber frame house near the river banks, that a darkness took root in the soul of a young boy, turning a quiet family life into a living nightmare of supernatural terror. The year was 1928, and the autumn winds brought with them a chill that had nothing to do with the changing seasons, but rather emanated from something ancient and malevolent. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about the ungodly sounds drifting from the residence at night, while shadows seemed to move independently of any physical source. The river town was known for its lumber barons and bustling trade, but it would soon become known for a battle between good and evil. The residence in question belonged to the Halstead family, who were hardworking people deeply rooted in the local community and the traditions of their faith. They attended the local parish faithfully and were known as upstanding citizens who contributed to the growth of the river town through their honest labor. Their youngest son, named Arthur, was a quiet and studious boy of 14 years who preferred reading history books to playing rough games with the other children in the neighborhood. Arthur had always been a gentle soul with a kind demeanor, which made the sudden and violent transformation that overtook him all the more shocking and heartbreaking for his devoted parents. The house itself was a sturdy structure built to withstand the harsh Wisconsin winters, but it was ill equipped to contain the spiritual storm that was brewing inside its walls. It began innocuously enough, with strange tapping sounds echoing from the walls of the bedroom, where Arthur slept soundly during the long nights of late October. At first, his parents dismissed the noises as the settling of the old wooden beams, or perhaps the scurrying of mice seeking refuge from the encroaching cold. However, the sounds soon evolved into distinct rhythmic patterns that seemed to communicate a sentient intelligence rather than random animal movements. The knocking would start precisely at midnight and continue for exactly 1 hour before ceasing abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Arthur began to complain of waking up with a feeling of immense pressure on his chest, as if an invisible weight were pinning him down to the mattress. His parents grew concerned as the circles under his eyes deepened, and his skin took on a pallid and waxen complexion. As the weeks progressed, the phenomena escalated from mere noises to physical disturbances that defied all logical explanation and terrified the household. Furniture in the bedroom would slide across the floorboards with a grating screech, despite no one being near the heavy oak pieces. Pictures of religious figures hanging on the walls were found turned upside down or smashed upon the floor, with the glass shattered into thousands of tiny shards. Arthur began to exhibit strange behavioral changes, withdrawing from his family and muttering in a low, guttural voice that sounded nothing like his own. The atmosphere in the house became thick and oppressive, making it difficult to breathe and causing visitors to leave abruptly due to an overwhelming sense of dread. The air temperature in the boys' room would drop drastically, causing breath to mist in the freezing air, even when the furnace was roaring. The terrifying turning point arrived on a storm-filled night in November, when the family gathered in the parlor to pray for the deliverance of their tormented son. As they knelt on the worn rug, the heavy wooden table in the center of the room lifted 3 feet into the air and hovered there in defiance of gravity. The mother screamed in terror as the table was hurled against the wall, with tremendous force splintering the wood and cracking the plaster. Arthur sat in the corner of the room with a blank expression on his face, his eyes rolled back so far that only the whites were visible. He began to speak in a language that none of them recognized, but which the local priest would later identify as an ancient dialect of Latin. The voice that emerged from the throat of the 14-year-old boy was deep and raspy, sounding like rocks grinding together deep within a cavern. Desperate for answers and fearing for the life of their son, the Halstead family reached out to their trusted family physician, Dr. William Albright. Dr. Albright was a man of science who believed that every ailment had a rational biological cause, and he arrived at the house with his medical bag in hand, expecting to diagnose a case of epilepsy or hysteria. He spent several hours examining Arthur, checking his reflexes and listening to his heart, while the boy lay tied to the bed with leather straps to prevent him from hurting himself. The doctor found no physical reason for the convulsions or the strange vocalizations. Yet he could not explain the scratches that appeared spontaneously on the boy's skin. These red welts formed words and symbols right before the doctor's eyes, causing the man of science to tremble with a fear he had never known. Dr. Albright left the house that night visibly shaken and admitted to the father that the case was beyond his medical expertise and understanding. He suggested that they seek spiritual counsel, as the symptoms did not align with any known pathology in the medical journals of the time. The family turned to Father Michael Thomas, a stern but compassionate priest from the nearby St. Joseph Cathedral, who had served the La Crosse diocese for over 30 years. Father Thomas was a man of deep faith who had heard whispers of possession, but had never encountered such a direct manifestation of evil in his long priesthood. He agreed to visit the home, to observe the boy and determine if the rigorous criteria for a major exorcism were met. The church was cautious in these matters, requiring absolute proof before authorizing the ancient ritual. When Father Thomas entered the bedroom, he was immediately struck by the foul odor of sulfur and rotting meat that permeated the small space. Arthur lay on the bed, his body contorted in unnatural positions that should have broken his bones. Yet he seemed to feel no pain. The boy turned his head slowly toward the priest and grinned a wicked smile that revealed a malice far too ancient for a child of 14. Before the priest could utter a word of greeting, the boy spoke to him in a mocking tone, revealing intimate sins from the priest's past that no living soul could possibly know. Father Thomas gripped his rosary tightly, his knuckles turning white, as he realized that he was standing in the presence of a true demonic entity. The entity laughed a sound that chilled the priest to the marrow of his bones. The investigation by the church was thorough and grueling, lasting for several weeks as witnesses were interviewed and the phenomena were documented in detail. The bishop of the La Crosse diocese reviewed the reports with a heavy heart, knowing that authorizing an exorcism was a grave decision. The reports detailed levitation of the boy's body, telekinetic movement of objects, and the boy's ability to speak languages he had never studied, including Greek and Aramaic. The most disturbing evidence was the physical transformation of the boy, whose face would distort into a mask of rage and hatred during the episodes. Finally, after much prayer and deliberation, the authorization was granted, and Father Thomas was appointed as the chief exorcist. He was to be assisted by a younger priest named Father Joseph, who was strong in body and spirit. The date for the exorcism was set for a cold night in December, when the city was blanketed in a thick layer of snow. The priests arrived at the Halstead home, armed with holy water, the crucifix, and the Roman ritual book containing the prayers of exorcism. They fasted and prayed for 3 days prior to the event, preparing their souls for the spiritual combat that lay ahead. The family was instructed to wait in the living room and to continue praying the rosary without ceasing, regardless of what sounds they heard from the room above. The atmosphere in the house was electric with tension, as the battle lines were drawn between the forces of light and the encroaching darkness. Arthur was restrained to the bed with heavy ropes, as the entity had shown incredible strength in previous outbursts. Father Thomas began the ritual with the sprinkling of holy water, which caused the boy to hiss and writhe in agony, as if the water were boiling acid. The priest commanded the entity to reveal its name and to depart from the body of the innocent child in the name of Jesus Christ. The response was a torrent of profanity and blasphemy that shocked the younger priest, Father Joseph, who struggled to maintain his composure. The entity claimed to be a legion of spirits, each one more vile than the last, and they taunted the priests with threats of violence and damnation. The room grew impossibly cold, and the windows rattled in their frames as an invisible wind whipped through the stagnant air. The candles flickered violently, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to take on demonic shapes. Hours turned into an agonizing test of endurance as the priests chanted the prayers of the church over and over again. The boy's body arched off the bed, held down only by the restraints and the weight of the spiritual pressure bearing down on him. At one point, the ropes snapped like twine, and Arthur lunged at Father Thomas with clawed hands aimed at the priest's throat. Father Joseph intervened just in time, tackling the boy back onto the mattress and holding him down with all his strength. The physical power displayed by the emaciated 14-year-old was terrifyingly supernatural, requiring both men to struggle to keep him contained. The entity screamed in rage, declaring that it would never leave, and that the boy's soul belonged to the darkness forever. As the night wore on, the psychological warfare intensified, with the entity using the boy's voice to plead for mercy in a heartbreaking tone. It would cry out for his mother, begging her to save him from the cruel priests who were torturing him. This was a cunning trick designed to break the resolve of the exorcists and the family listening downstairs. Father Thomas warned everyone not to listen to the lies of the deceiver and to remain focused on the prayers of liberation. The entity then shifted tactics again, vomiting a green bile that projected across the room and covered the priest's vestments. The stench was overpowering, forcing them to gag and cover their noses with handkerchiefs, while continuing the recitation of the Latin rites. The battle continued for 3 grueling nights, with the priests taking shifts to rest briefly, while the other continued the prayers. The toll on Arthur's physical body was severe, as he had not eaten or slept since the ritual began. His face was gaunt, and his eyes were sunken into his skull, giving him the appearance of a living corpse. The entity seemed to draw strength from the boy's suffering, feeding on the pain and fear in the room. On the 3rd night, the manifestations reached a fever pitch, with the walls of the room appearing to bleed a dark, viscous liquid. The sound of heavy footsteps could be heard pacing on the roof above them, despite the steep pitch and the ice-covered shingles. Father Thomas knew that they were reaching a critical juncture, and that the entity was weakening despite its displays of power. He redoubled his efforts, pressing the crucifix against the boy's forehead and commanding the demon to leave once and for all. The boy let out a shriek that shattered the window panes, sending glass flying into the snowy yard below. A dark shadow seemed to detach itself from the boy's body, rising up toward the ceiling like a plume of black smoke. It hovered there for a moment, a coalescing mass of pure malice, before dissipating with a final howl of defeat. Arthur's body went limp on the bed, and his breathing became shallow and rhythmic for the first time in days. The silence that followed the departure of the entity was deafening, and profound settling over the house like a heavy blanket. The priests slumped against the wall, exhausted and drained of all energy, their vestments stained and torn. They checked the boy's vital signs and found his pulse to be steady and his skin cool to the touch. The fever had broken, and the unnatural tension that had gripped his muscles was gone. Arthur opened his eyes and looked around the room with clarity and confusion, asking simply where his mother was. Father Thomas wept with relief and offered a prayer of thanksgiving, knowing that they had witnessed a miracle of deliverance. The aftermath of the exorcism was a time of healing and recovery for the Halstead family, who had been traumatized by the ordeal. They kept the details of the event secret, fearing ridicule and ostracization from the community. Arthur had no memory of the possession or the exorcism, recalling only a long nightmare of being trapped in a dark, cold place. He slowly regained his strength and returned to his studies, although he remained a quiet and reserved young man. The family eventually moved away from the house by the river, unable to shake the memories of the terror that had unfolded within those walls. The house stood empty for many years, acquiring a reputation as a cursed place where no one stayed for long. Years later, the legend of the possessed boy of La Crosse would become a whispered tale among the locals, a cautionary story about the existence of evil. The records of the exorcism were sealed in the diocesan archives, hidden away from public view to protect the privacy of the family. However, the story persisted, passed down through generations of residents who claimed to hear strange noises coming from the old house on windy nights. Some said that the entity had not truly left, but was merely waiting for another vulnerable soul to invite it back in. The Mississippi River continued to flow past the city, indifferent to the spiritual battles fought on its banks, carrying the secrets of the past down to the sea. The old Halstead house eventually fell into disrepair, its windows boarded up, and its paint peeling away to reveal the gray wood beneath. Teenagers would dare each other to approach the porch at night, but few had the courage to step inside the front door. Those who did claimed to feel an overwhelming sense of sadness and fear that drove them back out into the safety of the street. The room where the exorcism took place remained a focal point of the haunting, with reports of cold spots and the faint smell of sulfur lingering in the air. Paranormal investigators who visited the site in later decades captured strange electronic voice phenomena and unexplained orbs of light in their photographs. One particularly chilling account came from a group of urban explorers who entered the house in the 1970s. They reported finding the remnants of the leather straps still attached to the iron bed frame in the upstairs bedroom. As they examined the room, the door slammed shut with violent force, trapping them inside for several minutes. They heard a low, growling voice emanating from the corner of the room, warning them to leave before it was too late. When they finally managed to pry the door open, they fled the house in terror, vowing never to return. Their story added a new layer of fear to the legend, cementing the house's reputation as a place of true darkness. The psychological impact on Father Thomas was profound and lasting, shaping the remainder of his ministry. He became a recluse in his later years, spending hours in the chapel, praying for protection against the forces of darkness. He never spoke publicly about the exorcism, but his journals revealed the depth of his trauma. He wrote of nightmares where the demon would return to taunt him, whispering that it was not finished with him yet. The priest died peacefully in his sleep many years later, but those who found him said he was clutching his rosary so tightly that it had left an imprint on his hand. The assistant priest, Father Joseph, went on to become a scholar of demonology, dedicating his life to understanding the nature of evil. He traveled to Rome to study the ancient texts and to train other priests in the rite of exorcism. He often warned his students that the devil was a real and active force in the world, constantly seeking to ruin souls. He used the case of the Crosse boy as a prime example of how possession could occur in even the most devout families. His teachings emphasized the importance of spiritual vigilance and the power of faith in combating the darkness. As the 20th century drew to a close, the city of La Crosse expanded and modernized, with new developments encroaching on the old neighborhoods. The site of the Halsted House was eventually cleared to make way for a new apartment complex, erasing the physical evidence of the haunting. However, the residents of the new building soon began to report strange occurrences similar to those experienced by the Halsted family decades earlier. Objects would go missing only to reappear in odd places, and unexplained shadows were seen darting through the hallways. It seemed that the land itself retained a memory of the evil that had once resided there. The story of Arthur serves as a grim reminder that the veil between our world and the spiritual realm is thinner than we might like to believe. It challenges the modern skepticism that dismisses such events as mere superstition or mental illness. The documented testimony of the doctors and priests involved provides a compelling case for the reality of the supernatural. Even today, in the quiet corners of La Crosse, the name of the possessed boy is spoken with a shudder by those who know the history. The darkness that visited that house may have been banished, but the fear it instilled remains etched in the collective memory of the city. Historians and folklorists have tried to rationalize the events, pointing to the social and cultural anxieties of the 1920s. They argue that the isolation of the Midwest and the religious fervor of the time created a fertile ground for such stories to take root. Yet these academic explanations fail to account for the physical evidence and the multiple eyewitnesses who had nothing to gain by fabricating such a tale. The scratches on the boy's skin, the levitation of heavy furniture, and the knowledge of hidden sins are details that defy easy dismissal. The truth of what happened in that house remains a terrifying enigma. The Mississippi River remains a constant presence in the story, a silent witness to the events that unfolded on its banks. Its dark waters have seen many tragedies and mysteries over the centuries, but few as chilling as the possession of the young boy. The river creates a natural boundary, a threshold between the known and the unknown that seems to attract spiritual energy. Some believe that the limestone bluffs surrounding the city act as a conductor for paranormal activity, amplifying the power of spirits. Whatever the cause, the connection between the land and the supernatural is undeniable in this river town. In the archives of the Vatican, there is said to be a sealed file containing the full report of the Crosse exorcism, including photographs that have never been seen by the public. Rumors suggest that these images show the physical distortions of the boy's body and the strange manifestations of light and shadow in the room. The church maintains its silence on the matter, protecting the sanctity of the rite and the privacy of the individuals involved. This secrecy only fuels the fascination, with the case leaving the public to fill in the blanks with their own worst fears. The legacy of the possessed boy of La Crosse is not one of triumph, but of enduring caution regarding the unknown. It teaches us that innocence is no protection against the forces of darkness, and that evil can strike anywhere at any time. The story forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that there are powers in this universe that we cannot control or fully understand. It leaves us with a lingering sense of unease, a feeling that we are not as safe in our homes as we would like to think. The darkness is always there waiting for an opening to enter our lives, even now when the wind howls through the bluffs and the river churns with the spring thaw. The people of La Crosse remember the boy. They light candles in the cathedral and say prayers for protection against the evil that walks in the night. The story has become part of the fabric of the city, a dark thread woven into the tapestry of its history. It is a tale that will continue to be told for generations, to come a warning from the past to the future. The final thought that haunts those who delve into this story is the question of what happened to the entity after it was cast out. Did it return to the abyss from which it came, or does it still roam the earth seeking a new vessel? The scriptures say that a demon cast out wanders through dry places, seeking rest and finding none. If that is true, then the entity that tormented Arthur is still out there somewhere waiting and watching, and perhaps on a quiet night in a house much like yours, it will find the door unlocked and invite itself in. The enduring mystery of the La Crosse possession is not just in the supernatural phenomena, but in the profound silence that followed. The family vanished into anonymity, leaving behind only whispers and a decaying house. It is this void of information that allows the horror to fester in the imagination of the locals. We are left to wonder if Arthur truly lived a normal life afterwards, or if the darkness left a permanent mark on his soul. The ambiguity is the most terrifying part of all.